That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. We all know the quote, right?
Absolutely iconic.
But here's the thing. Did it really happen? I mean, for over 50 years now, that question's been out there for, well, millions of people. Was the 1969 moon landing this amazing human achievement? Or was it maybe just, faked?
Yeah, it's pretty wild that this doubt really took hold. And you have to remember the context, right? The Cold War was raging.
Oh, totally.
The space race. It was this incredibly intense thing between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And the Soviets were ahead early on. Sputnik, Gagarin.
Right, America was playing catch-up. The pressure must have been immense, not just to compete, but to actually win. To land on the moon first, that was the big prize.
The ultimate prize, yeah. A huge symbol of, technological power. And, well, that's where the argument comes in for some people. The sheer desperation, it created this huge motive, maybe, to win at any cost.
Even if that meant faking it.
That's the theory. So for you listening, we've gathered quite a few sources that really dig into this whole debate. We're going to look at the main arguments from the people who think it was a hoax.
But we're also going to look at the evidence, the stuff that supports the idea that, yes, Apollo 11 and the later missions really did happen.
Exactly. The aim here isn't really to tell you what to believe. Definitely not. It's more about unpacking the key points on both sides. Trying to understand why this whole conspiracy theory is still around,
Okay, let's jump right in then. The arguments from the hoax side, one of the big ones visually is the photos, no stars.
Ah, yes, the starless sky.
The argument goes, look, the moon has no atmosphere. Shouldn't the sky be, absolutely packed with incredibly bright stars?
It seems logical, doesn't it, on the surface? But NASA and, photography experts, they have an explanation. It's all about the camera settings. Think about it. The lunar surface itself, the lander, the astronauts' suits, they're incredibly bright, lit by direct sunlight. To get a good picture of that, you need a really fast shutter speed and a small aperture. Let in just a little light.
Right, so you don't overexpose the main subject.
Exactly. But those settings, the ones needed for the bright surface, they just don't let in enough light to capture the faint light from distant stars. It's kind of like trying to take a picture of, say, a bright porch light at night.
Yeah.
The light bulb will look fine, but you probably won't see any faint stars in the background of that photo either. Same principle.
Okay, that makes technical sense. What about the flag, the waving flag? That's another huge one. You see in the pictures, it looks like it's flapping. And the immediate thought is, hang on, there's no air on the moon, no wind.
Right. How can a flag wave in a vacuum? Well, the answer here is it wasn't actually waving because of wind. It was designed to look like it was flying.
Designed?
It was mounted on a pole, sure, but there was also a horizontal bar, kind of like a curtain rod, attached along the top edge. The idea was to make it hang fully extended, unfurled, so it would look good in the photos in the still, airless environment.
Ah, so it wasn't just hanging limp.
No, exactly. And here's a little detail. Apparently, the astronauts had a bit of trouble extending that horizontal bar all the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it didn't quite straighten out completely. It stayed slightly crumpled or wrinkled, those ripples you see. That's not wind, that's just the fabric being bunched up because the support rod wasn't perfectly straight. A bit of, human error during setup.
So a practical design choice, plus a little setup hiccup, creates this image that fuels decades of conspiracy theories.
Kind of fascinating, isn't it, how we interpret things?
It really is. Okay, next up, shadows. This is another visual clue people point to. They say the shadows in some photos seem to go in different directions.
The multiple light source argument?
Yeah, suggesting it was filmed on a set with, studio spotlights.
Right. But again, the explanation comes down to the lunar environment itself. The key thing to remember is the moon's surface isn't a flat studio floor. It's really uneven.
Hills, craters, bumps.
Exactly. You've got slopes, dips, mounds, rocks. So even with just one single, very distant light source, the sun, the way shadows fall across that uneven terrain can look really weird in a 2D photograph. Shadows might appear to converge or diverge simply because the ground beneath them isn't level.
Okay, so the ground's shape affects the shadow direction.
Precisely. Plus, the lunar soil itself is pretty reflective, so you get light bouncing off the surface, creating fainter secondary illumination and shadows that might add to the confusing look. It's complex light interaction, not necessarily studio lights.
So it's the landscape, not lighting rigs.
Yeah.
Got it. Then there's the quality of the photos themselves. Some seem, almost too perfect.
Perfectly framed, sharp focus.
Yeah. How did these guys in bulky spacesuits with cameras maybe mounted on their chests, maybe not even looking through a viewfinder properly, get such amazing shots, like professional photographers?
It's a fair question about the skill level, right? But there are a few factors. First, these astronauts weren't just pilots. They had tons of training, and that included a lot of photography training.
Okay. They practiced.
They practiced a lot. Second, the cameras were often chest-mounted, Hasselblads, with settings often pre-calculated. They learned techniques for aiming even without looking directly through the viewfinder. And third, and this is important, they took thousands of pictures across all the Apollo missions. Thousands. What we usually see, the iconic images, those are the absolute best ones, the highlights.
The greatest hits album, basically. Not every single track they recorded.
Exactly. You're not seeing the blurry ones, the badly framed ones, the ones where someone blinked, metaphorically speaking. We see the curated selection.
Right. That makes sense, too. Okay, so those are some of the big visual arguments and the sort of standard explanations. But it's not just NASA saying, trust us, we went, is it? What does the wider scientific world say?
Oh, absolutely, not just NASA. That's a really crucial point. The scientific consensus globally is overwhelming. Experts, scientists, engineers from countries all over the world support the authenticity of the landings.
Even countries that were rivals back then, like the Soviets.
Especially them. Think about it. The Soviet Union was the U.S.'s biggest competitor in space. They had the technology, the expertise, and, frankly, the motive to track everything the Apollo missions did.
They must have been listening in, watching like hawks.
You bet they were. They monitored the radio transmissions, tracked the spacecraft's trajectory. If there had been any slip-up, any hint that Apollo 11 wasn't actually orbiting the moon or landing or transmitting from the surface,
they would have known, and they would have shouted it from the rooftops.
Yeah.
It would have been the biggest propaganda coup imaginable.
Precisely. The fact that the Soviet Union, America's fiercest rival, never once disputed the landing, that's considered really powerful, albeit indirect, evidence by historians and experts. Their silence speaks volumes.
That is a strong point. What about, like, evidence we can see today? Anything more concrete? I think I heard you can actually see the landing sites now.
Yes, that's right. With modern technology, we have high-resolution orbital satellites now from NASA, but also from other countries like India, China, Japan.
And they can photograph the moon's surface.
In incredible detail. And these satellites, like NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, have taken pictures of all the Apollo landing sites. You can actually see the descent stages of the lunar modules left behind.
Wow.
You can see the tracks left by the astronauts' boots, the paths driven by the lunar rovers on the later missions, even the scientific instruments they set up.
So physical evidence, still there, visible from orbit, decades later.
Exactly. And speaking of those instruments, some of them, like the seismometers they left to measure moonquakes, continue to operate and send back data for years after the astronauts left.
So stuff was left there, and it worked.
It worked. You'd need an unbelievable level of global conspiracy involving rival nations and independent scientists monitoring that data for years to fake that. It stretches plausibility way beyond just faking some photos.
Yeah, the scale of the required dissection just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Okay, now, shifting gears a bit. There's a name that always seems to pop up in these discussions. Stanley Kubrick.
Ah, yes. The Kubrick connection.
The legendary director of 2001, A Space Odyssey, which came out just before the moon landing. The theory goes that NASA, needing to fake it, hired Kubrick, the master filmmaker who just made the most realistic space movie ever, to secretly direct the whole thing on a soundstage.
It's definitely one of the more, shall we say, cinematic parts of the conspiracy theory. And you can see why, right? 2001 looked incredible, groundbreaking for its time.
Totally. So the idea is, if anyone could fake it convincingly,
it would be him.
Yeah.
But it's really important to stress there's absolutely zero credible evidence for this. None.
No documents, no testimony, nothing.
Nothing concrete. It's pure speculation fueled by the visual coincidence of his film and the timing. Kubrick himself never admitted anything like this, and nobody involved has ever come forward with any proof. It's a fascinating what if, a cool story, but
not based on evidence.
Yeah.
More like movie fan fiction meets conspiracy theory.
Something like that, yeah. It adds a layer of intrigue, but it doesn't really hold up under scrutiny.
Okay. So if it wasn't Kubrick, where did this whole idea, this whole we didn't go narrative, actually come from? Who started it?
Well, the theory really started gaining steam in the mid-1970s. A key figure, probably the most central figure in popularizing it early on, was a guy named Bill Kaysing.
Bill Kaysing. And who was he?
He'd been a U.S. Navy officer, and then he worked for a time as a technical writer at Rocketdyne.
Rocketdyne. They built the engines, right? The giant Saturn V rocket engine.
That's the company, yes. So he had some connection, though primarily in communications, not engineering. In 1976, he self-published this pamphlet, basically a booklet, called We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion Swindle.
Okay, a catchy title. What was his main argument? Did he have, like, inside information from Rocketdyne?
Not really specific inside info, no. His argument was mainly based on his own calculations of probability. He had an English degree, not a background in rocket science or physics, but he basically argued that the technology in the 60s just wasn't reliable enough.
He thought the chances of failure were too high.
Extremely high, in his view. So high, he concluded, that it was actually more likely that NASA decided to fake the whole thing on a secret movie set rather than risk catastrophic failure, even factoring in the risk of the Soviets finding out.
So, less about specific photo anomalies, more about a general disbelief in the technological capability at the time.
That was his core premise, yeah. He did use some of the photo arguments later, but his starting point was the odds. Interestingly, he later said his goal was partly just to get people to question authority.
Okay, so Kaysing gets the ball rolling in 76. How does it spread from there? Does it connect with other groups?
It does. It gets picked up quite notably by the Flat Earth Society.
Wait, the Flat Earth Society, how do they get involved?
Yeah, under their leader at the time, a man named Charles K. Johnson, in the late 70s and early 80s, they really embraced the moon landing hoax theory and promoted it quite heavily.
Why? What's the connection between thinking the Earth is flat and thinking the moon landing was faked?
For Johnson and his followers, it was all connected. Their belief in a flat Earth was tied up with specific religious interpretations. They saw mainstream science, especially astronomy and space exploration, as fundamentally contradicting their literal reading of the Bible.
So the photos of a round Earth from space.
Exactly. Those photos and the moon landing itself were seen by them as part of a huge conspiracy, a conspiracy designed to discredit their flat Earth view, undermine the Bible, and, as Johnson put it, kind of remove Jesus from the picture.
Wow. So for them, faking the moon landing wasn't just about, say, beating the Soviets. It was part of a much bigger, almost spiritual deception.
That was their perspective, yes. Johnson argued that the whole idea of a spherical Earth was part of this deception, and the moon landing hoax was a key piece of propaganda to support it. He even claimed, rather boldly, that almost nobody believed the Earth was round before the space program and the landing.
That's quite a claim.
It is. It shows how these different, seemingly unrelated conspiracy theories can sometimes merge and reinforce each other within a particular belief system.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up where we've been, we looked at the main arguments from the doubters, the stars, the flag, the shadows, the photo quality.
Mm-hmm. And the scientific and technical explanations for each of those.
Right. Then we talked about the broader evidence, the scientific consensus, the fact the Soviets never cried foul, the modern satellite images of the landing sites, the instruments left behind.
Yep. And touched on the Kubrick theory, more myth than reality, and then the origins with Bill Kaysing and the unexpected adoption by the Flat Earth Society.
It really lays out the landscape of the debate, doesn't it? The skepticism versus the established science and history.
It really does. It's a classic example of how a compelling counter-narrative can persist for decades, even with a mountain of evidence against it.
So here we are, 55 years later?
Mm.
And whether you think it was all a hoax or you completely buy the official story, you have to admit the moon landing and the whole controversy around it is still incredibly captivating.
Oh, absolutely. It hasn't faded away. Despite all the evidence, the idea that maybe, just maybe, it was the greatest show not on Earth, that idea still grabs people.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Given how huge the Apollo program was, this massive, complex, globally watched event, what does the fact that this particular conspiracy theory has lasted so long and still resonates with some people, what does that tell us?
Yeah, what does it suggest about maybe our underlying trust in governments and institutions and authority, or about how we process truly extraordinary, almost unbelievable achievements? Does it tap into some fundamental human need to question, to look for the hidden story, especially when something seems almost too good or too audacious to be true?